Welcome back to the Play-by-Play Podcast YouTube channel, where today we are going to be talking about how the Los Angeles Clippers are potentially interested in signing Bradley Beal and Chris Paul following a potential buyout between Bradley Beal and the Phoenix Suns. And if I'm being honest, real quick, if we're being honest about this subject, this year's free agency has been a little bit lackluster. I think that we can all agree about that. There just hasn't been that punch of a move that we have been waiting on a day-to-day basis for, like we had with Kawhi Leonard back in 2019, 2020, like we had with LeBron James back in 2010 when he first left the Cleveland Cavaliers, and even back in 2014, 2015 when LeBron James was potentially looking at, re-signing with the Cleveland Cavaliers. And I think that majority of that really comes down to the fact that we are still waiting for Giannis Antetokounmpo and his future with the Milwaukee Bucks. There have been talks about trades. There have been talks about how the Bucks have been shutting it down, and there's just been so much up and down information that we don't really know what direction that team is really going with Giannis. And right now, everything seems to be settling, and because of that, there really hasn't been any real big-time move or big-time free agent signing outside of possibly a Kevin Durant that has really rocked the league in a significant way. And I think that's why we've seen a little bit slower of a free agency process this year around. But I did feel like this story today, reported by sideline sources, of the Clippers potentially coming to a deal with two of these guys is a little bit interesting, and more so is interesting to see how the super team era is slowly but surely coming to an end, and how this team might signify that and the dissension of the super team's effectiveness within the NBA. But real quick, before we get into all of that, I want to encourage you guys to go down below, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, comment, and share with your friends, as well as follow us on all social medias, that being TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. All those apps are going to be down below, as well as on all those social medias. You will get to see my reactions to breaking news within the NBA and the NFL, and you will never miss for whenever the podcast uploads an episode. And without further ado, let's not waste any time. Let's see why the Clippers want to sign Chris Paul and Bradley Beal, and how this will really affect their team going forward, and why this probably isn't the best idea. Now, admittedly, when I first heard this news, I wasn't really blown away with anything, and I actually didn't really have any big-time issues with it right away, especially with Chris Paul potentially being signed with the Los Angeles Clippers, because as we know, Chris Paul has just recently announced that he's going to be retiring from the NBA, and I think what better team could you really have him on than the Los Angeles Clippers? In my opinion, when I look back at Chris Paul's career, that's probably the team that I'm most going to attach him to, just because of the so-called aura that we call it these days, or the nostalgia that Lob City Clippers team had with him, DeAndre Jordan, Blake Griffin, and of course even players like Jamal Crawford and Austin Rivers, and head coach Doc Rivers. That team was just so much fun to watch. And even though I do think that potentially seeing them in an LA Lakers uniform opposite of LeBron could be potentially entertaining as well, to have him be with one of his close friends, I really think that this would be a good way to send off his career. But then I heard about them potentially coming to a deal with Bradley Beal following Beal's buyout with the Phoenix Suns. And that's where I got a little bit worried. And first off, I want to say that I do understand why they're making this deal, right? The Clippers experiment with the players that they have is really coming to an end, right? They had that big time deal in 2020 when they traded for Paul George and they signed away Kawhi Leonard from the Toronto Raptors, and it clearly has not worked. Paul George isn't even on the roster anymore. They traded away the current NBA MVP for Paul George in that deal, which definitely has to hurt them, especially because they have not gotten a lot out of that deal. Kawhi Leonard has still not been able to play even 70 games for them in his tenure with the Los Angeles Clippers, and they've been moving around a ton of pieces, including the recent trade of them earlier today, with them trading away Norman Powell to the Miami Heat in a 3-team deal to acquire John Collins, which first off, I do want to say, I know that I'm moving around a little bit, I do think that deal will end up being beneficial for the Clippers. Powell was a great player, obviously a big time scorer for them. One of the reasons that they were even involved in those playoff talks in this previous season. But I do think that his time was a little bit coming to an end. And Collins, I like his versatility at the power forward and center position. I liked him a lot in Atlanta with what he had. He had some ability to extend the floor outside of the three-point line, but also be a great rim protector on the block. He has solid athleticism and whatnot. And I just felt like his position in Utah, he just wasn't being utilized right. They were using him at times as like an undersized center, at other times as a natural power forward position. But I think being on the Clippers, he'll get to perform more at that natural power forward position, being opposite of Ivica Zubac. And I think that will suit him well. That'll allow him to rim run a little bit more, play a little bit more on the outside, and be able to attack the rim. And I think that's where he's better suited. So I do like that move for the Clippers. But moving back to Bradley Beal, it is clear that they are coming to an end with this group. So they just grabbed John Collins. So they have a new front court duo there with Collins and Zubac. And now you look at it, and Kawhi Leonard is 34 years old. He has not had a full season healthy with them. James Harden, what is he? 34, 35 years old as well. He's coming to the low, and he has had some lowered scoring numbers in previous years and becoming much more of a playmaking, almost bigger point guard, if you will, in that backcourt situation that they had. And they've traded away all these different pieces within their rotation, guys like, Terrence Mann and whatnot. And they've just been moving so many pieces that I think that they have came to the conclusion that they need to solidify a one-year roster and go for it one more time. But the problem is that the roster that they are constructing has historically, especially recently, not worked out very well. I mean, let's be honest, guys. Super teams are done as of this point within the NBA, and it's really does hurt me to say, because that's the era that I really grew up in. I grew up in the era where we had the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Golden State Warriors, right? Where you had Curry, Thompson, Durant, and Draymond Green all in the same squad. Where you had LeBron, D Wade, and Bosh. Where you had Kyrie, Love, and LeBron and whatnot. Even one of the first super teams that came out, having Kobe Bryant, Steve Nash, and Dwight Howard all on the team. And to me, that's what this Los Angeles Clippers team really reminds me of. A point guard that is on his last leg in Chris Paul. Sure, does Chris Paul have like the injury history that Steve Nash had in that final year with the Los Angeles Lakers and that big time fall off? No, he's still been able to be a contributable player even at 40, 41 years old and whatnot. But who even knows how one more year of tread on his tires is going to affect him going into this season? Can you really see a 41-year-old Chris Paul potentially contributing to a team that wants to be playoff, even championship contending? I think that he will definitely, I would assume, especially if they trade away Beal, that he will have a six-man bench role, backup point guard role coming off the bench on that team. I mean, if they sign Beal away, I would see it to be Harden, Beal, Leonard, Collins, and Zubac all in that starting five, and then you have Chris Paul coming off the bench. But do you really think that's going to be it? Kobe Bryant and Dwight Howard on those Los Angeles Lakers teams had big-time injury issues and big-time chemistry issues as well. There was a little bit of a descent with Chris Paul and James Harden at the end of their Houston run together and whatnot. Kawhi Leonard has not been able to stay healthy, as we've mentioned dozens of times within this episode. And more so over, not just that Kawhi Leonard has not been healthy. I mean, the man has not played over 70 games since 2017 or 2016, sorry. And this previous season was his lowest amount of games played with 37 games. This was his lowest amount of games played since 2017, where he played 9 games, and I believe his final years with the San Antonio Spurs. But Bradley Beal, the descent of Bradley Beal has been incredible to watch. I mean, especially on the Phoenix Suns in this previous year. And let's be honest, Bradley Beal has never looked as exceptional being next to multiple superstars. I mean, we saw his game in Phoenix, but also in Washington. He was solid, and that's because he was younger. And that's another thing that I'm pointing to. He's a lot older than he was when they had the trio of, Otto Porter, Bradley Beal, and John Wall, and he was still averaging over 20 points per game. The man has had his first under 18 points per game average since 2015. The last time this man was a glorified scorer was all the way back in, I believe, 2017 through 2018, where he was averaging 31 points per game. And let's not forget, that came at a time where the Washington Wizards had no one, where Bradley Beal had an open court to himself. I believe John Wall was still dealing with injuries and had later on been traded, and Beal had the floor to himself to do whatever he wanted and score as many points as he could. Do you really see him being in a spot next to Kawhi Leonard, who's a scorer, next to James Harden, who, even though he's been in a playmaking position for the last 2 or 3 years, can still score the basketball and can still be 15, 16 plus points per game. And you could even make the argument saying, okay, well, Kawhi hasn't been, very healthy in years past, so maybe Bradley Beal can fill in. We did not see that on Phoenix. When Durant and Booker were off the floor, Beal wasn't even effective. Even when all three of them were on the floor, they weren't even that effective. And it was the same story. Him and KD were older. That was a contending type roster that they had to build around. This is not going to go well, guys. And I hate to be hating on this, but I don't even know if they have really the stereotypical depth to really play through this. They have Chris Dunn. They have Bojan Bogdanovic. I'm looking at it right now at the roster. If I'm looking down, they have Derrick Jones Jr. They just signed away Brook Lopez. So you may have like a 7 to 8 man rotations within there. But even then, the modern NBA roster building has came down to youth and depth. And that is really the basis of this episode. We have seen teams in previous years, like the Brooklyn Nets, who James Harden himself was a part of, who have thrown all of their eggs into one basket, who have signed along older veteran free agents who, don't get me wrong, are still talented. Guys like LaMarcus Aldridge, who they signed in that offseason that year, Blake Griffin and whatnot. They had Mike James at backup point guard, suitable backups. But it ruined them in that championship year, not being able to win the championship, and it ruined them down the line. And when you look at this, the fact that the Los Angeles Clippers don't own their own first round pick till 2030, that they either don't own it or they have pick swaps all the way up to 2030. When you look at the fact that Kawhi Leonard, James Harden, Chris Paul, and Bradley Beal would all be on their last legs by the time that they retire, potentially in 2028, when this team is long gone and done for, the Clippers are not going to have any assets to lean on. And I understand that they felt in a very stuck position. They weren't going to be able to go out and get a lot of big time assets for these older and injured and haggard players. But you also had solid depth like Chris Dunn. You had Norman Powell that you could have gotten some solid first round draft capital for. And they just didn't. And from what we've seen from teams like the Oklahoma City Thunder, from what we've seen from teams like the Indiana Pacers, from what we've seen from teams like the Houston Rockets and whatnot, it is youth and depth. It is having a 8, 9, 10, maybe even 11 man rotation and taking all of the pressure off of your superstars for having to play 82 games plus playoffs and allowing them to be at their best. That's what these teams did very well. And in the case of Indiana even, they did well just because of their Saladas style, by being a faster paced team and having backups to be able to fill in constantly and being able to play that style constantly throughout the game. That's what they succeeded at. We are done seeing these older squads being able to perform anymore. When was the last time that we really saw that happen? The last time that I remember seeing a older trio really be successful was the San Antonio Spurs back in 2013. And even then, they had a rookie, second year, third year Kawhi Leonard who was winning finals MVP and locking up LeBron James and leading them. So even then, they had a younger guy to go ahead and lean on. The Clippers don't have a young guy to lean on in this case. And in my opinion, I just feel that they are stuck, that they don't have any assets to be able to lean on in the future. And in the end, it's just going to ruin them. Yes, they're taking a final stand. Yes, could they potentially win, upwards of 40 games and potentially be a bottom 4 seed or maybe even a 5 or 4 seed or whatnot? Sure. But are they even slated to make it out of the first round? I don't even think they're even close to that point at this point, especially with Kawhi getting hurt, especially with Harden's way of play becoming a lot more conservative, especially with Bradley Beal not being able to show that he can play next to superstars and being older himself, especially with Chris Paul being relegated to a backup point guard role. If even that, he's going to have to play next to Chris Dunn, and him being 41 years old. I understand their logic, right? And I understand why they're going with this, but I can tell you right now, if you think that this team is going to be competitive, it's not. We have not seen a older, successful team be able to pull things off since 2013 with the San Antonio Spurs. And even the situation that they were in was a lot different than we have now. I wish Chris Paul all the best. I wish Bradley Beal all the best. I hope that this works out. But in a top-heavy, super competitive and hungry Western Conference with teams that just have so much more assets to be able to lean on. You know, I'd take OKC, I'd take Houston, I would take Denver, I would take Dallas. There are numerous teams that I would take over. I would probably take Minnesota over this team as of right now. I would put this team within the top 10, probably at around, 8 or 7. I would probably take the San Antonio Spurs over this team right now, despite the lack of the experience that they have, because they just have more of a stereotypical modern NBA built team. The NBA modern built team is youth, depth, and draft assets. And the way that any way that you want to look at it, the LA Clippers have none of that, and that is why, in my opinion, they will not succeed in this modern NBA. And this team will unfortunately be a fun one-year team that we will remember, but won't have really any big-time significance on the impact of the league. And that's all I really have for you guys today. Let me know what you think down below in the comments, as well as subscribing, leaving a like, and sharing with your friends. Do you like this potential move for the LA Clippers? Do you think that this team could be good? Do you think that they could potentially compete and win an NBA championship? And how excited would you be to see Chris Paul in the LA Clippers? Let's give Chris Paul a little bit of a hand for an incredible 21-year career, and I'm just so glad that he could potentially, like I said, this isn't finalized, but could potentially still be going to one of the most nostalgic teams that I remember from my childhood. It's really exciting. So like I said, go down below and do all that, as well as following all of our social medias, TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. We're on all those social medias. You'll get to see my latest reaction to the breaking news within the NBA and the NFL. And of course, always be notified for whenever a podcast uploads an episode. And without further ado, guys, that's all I have for you guys today. I hope that you guys have an amazing week. I will see you guys on the next one. Take it easy. Peace.